Lesson 3, Managing Failover Cluster Roles. So we're going to continue our conversation on cluster failover. And so in this lesson, we're looking at specifically how to configure role-specific settings, including continuously available shares, configure guest clusters, configuring VM monitors, and configure failover and preference settings. So the first part of this chapter is managing the failover cluster roles. And so at this level, failover clusters provide high availability and scalability for applications, which we have already discussed. We use the high availability wizard to configure a cluster role, formerly known as clustered services or applications, which is a service or application that is made highly available. I'm sorry, they do repeat themselves several times. So, if there is a server that has a problem, and it's part of a cluster role, and it fails, that service or that role can roll right over to an additional node. Cluster roles are divided into two different types: cluster-aware clustered roles and generic cluster roles. In a cluster-aware cluster role, we designed to work with Windows Server and Server 2012 R2. Failover clusters. Some of these examples could be like file servers, clusters, things of that nature. Oh, don't forget virtual machine clustered as well. As opposed to a generic cluster role, which just provides high availability for a service application script that is not originally designed to run as a cluster. So the big thing here is generic cluster roles are going to basically create a cluster for things that normally are not clustered. So what are some of those types of roles? That's a good question. So first thing we have to talk about is to be able to add a cluster role, we can right click on the roles and nodes and click configure role, which starts our wizard for high availability. These are some of the options that we can get for our roles. That way we can distribute load for like a DFS name server or a file server, a generic application, other things that are going to be allowed to be distributed. Next, we have to understand the server message block, the SMB. Previously, it was version 2.2, but version 3 is now the newest. And it's the protocol that allows for addressing, essentially for data blocks. And it was introduced with Windows 8 and Server 2012. And it brings significant changes and functionality for improved performance for virtualized data centers. Some of the features are encryption and volume shadow copying and PowerShell and direct releasing, transparent failover and scale out. So there's multiple things that the SMB version 3 has included that has been improved. So big thing with SMB is it's one version, and it's also known as a Common Internet File System, or CIFS, C-I-F-S. It operates as an application layer protocol, and it's used specifically for providing shared access, whether they be local or network, to resources such as files, printers, and additional resources. So general use roles, such as a file server role, it was essentially in 2008, the server role or the file server role was for general use. But it basically allowed for a centralized location for users to share files or for a specific application that could be opened and closed frequently. It supports SMB, it supports the network file system, it supports things like data duplication, resource managing, DFS, replication, things of those nature. The file server type is a file server for general use or a scale-out file server for application data, and you have to choose the most appropriate one. File share profiles you can actually set depending on your specific needs. So the scale-out file server, introduced in 2012 and can be used with a cluster, it is intended for application data such as Hyper-V with VMs, as well as for file shares that require reliability, manageability, and high performance, which again, it's pretty common between any type of file server. Unlike a general use file server cluster, the scale-out file server cluster is an active failover. So it's similar to load balancing, except the loads can fail over a little quicker, where all the file shares are online and all nodes simultaneous. So if one node fails, there is no backup time where the passive become active. The passive or the secondary is already active and it's already involved. So although the scaled out file server supports SMB, it does not support NFS. So things like data replication, DFS replication, and file server resource management, not really going to be happening at the scaled out version. To support multiple nodes to access the same volume, we have to have some form of scale-out file server, CSV, which we discussed in our previous lecture. Big part of this is also making high available our virtual machines with Hyper-V. You cannot run Hyper-V on a VM. In addition, to avoid losing network connectivity, you must create the same virtual network on all physical hosts that participate in the cluster to make communication easier. That's not 100% true, but that is what they're recommending. A failover cluster that is made up of 2 or more virtual machines is typically referred to as a guest cluster, which is used to provide high availability for virtual machines. Physical hosts should have similar hardware, and that hardware should also allow for data execution prevention. Processor architecture and version should be the same. The hosts should be as close as possible with one another. Normally, we're sharing data via either SAS or SCSI, fiber channel, other forms of mass storage controllers, maybe iSCSI. Big thing here is we need high quality, high speed disks formatted with NTFS. High availability, again, the disks can be MBR or GPT, doesn't really matter as long as they're basic disks. To protect against a host failure, it's recommended that you place virtual machines that are part of the same guest cluster on different physical hosts. That way, if one physical host goes down, not all the VMs go down as well. So another way to make VMs high available is to store them on some type of SMB3 file share and then run them from that file share. That way, as the physical hosts go down, the VMs are stored somewhere else. They may be processed on the server that's going down, but as another server becomes available, the processing of that VM can then be migrated to the new host. If you have multiple nodes in a cluster, you can actually set specifics. You can set preferred nodes. That way, just in case things aren't equal, you may actually want things to fail over on a higher quality server first. Failover tab, you can actually list the items what to do for a failover, like prevent fallback, allow fallback, grace period times, things of that nature. Lastly is our virtual machine monitoring with server and 2012 R2. Virtual machine monitor is used to monitor specific services within VM, and this allows you to react to the problem with services on the fly. Better control, better configuration. That's actually it for this chapter. So I want to thank you guys and hope you have a great night.